Professor Zelnak slammed a strange-looking plant specimen onto the lab table, its purple tendrils curling as if trying to escape the sealed, transparent container. This, students, is why today's lesson on xenobotanical toxins is perhaps the most important class you'll attend during your interplanetary studies. Keith Northfield felt his stomach growl as he stared at the plant. He'd skipped breakfast to make it to the early morning class at the Galactic Alliance Academy. The 23-year-old human exchange student was still adjusting to the 30-hour day cycle on Vecheria Station, where Earth had established its premier xenobiology research facility. The Veridian Vex, Professor Zelnak continued, his four arms gesturing simultaneously while his scaled skin shimmered under the laboratory lights. Native to Proxima Centauri b, this innocent-looking specimen has killed 17 researchers and countless indigenous species. Keith's attention drifted as he glanced around the lab. He was the only human in a class of 22 alien students. After 3 months at the academy, he still felt like an outsider. The Vetrurians, with their 4 arms and scaled skin, seemed to dominate everything, while the gelatinous morbulans in the corner constantly whispered to each other through vibrations Keith couldn't hear. The toxins in these plants attack neural pathways in most carbon-based life forms, Zelnak explained, his third eye blinking intensely. Symptoms begin with paralysis and progress to organ shutdown within minutes. There is no antidote once ingestion occurs. The professor moved to a different specimen, this one resembling something between a cabbage and a spider, with thin red filaments extending from its core. The arachno lettuce from Kepler 186f has evolved to mimic edible vegetation on multiple worlds. Keith's stomach growled again, louder this time. Several students turned their eye stalks toward him. Some indigenous species on Kepler 186f consume this plant with no ill effects, the professor continued. However, for humans and most humanoid species, the neurotoxin causes immediate convulsions, followed by respiratory failure. As the professor moved to a third specimen, this one floating in a containment field and glowing faintly blue, Keith raised his hand. Yes, human Northfield. Professor Zelnak acknowledged, his primary eyes narrowing while his third eye remained fixed on the specimen. "Does anyone have any salad dressing?" Keith asked, his face completely serious. The laboratory fell silent. Even the ambient hum of the air recyclers seemed to pause. Professor Zelnak's scales darkened to a deep purple. "I beg your pardon, salad dressing," Keith repeated, gesturing toward the plant specimens. "You know, for the space lettuce." The Vetrurian professor's third eye twitched violently. "Human Northfield, these specimens would kill you within minutes of consumption. This is not a joke." "I know," but Keith hesitated, suddenly aware that his attempt at humor had fallen catastrophically flat. It was just, human humor, because they look like salad ingredients. Trix, a Vetrurian student sitting next to Keith, leaned away from him. "Is this some form of death wish ritual?" she whispered, her scales turning a pale yellow. No, Keith said quickly. "Humans sometimes use humor to deal with tense situations. It's called gallows humor." Professor Zelnak's scales slowly returned to their normal blue hue. "Human Northfield, while I appreciate cultural differences, I must emphasize the severity of today's lesson. These specimens represent the deadliest botanical discoveries in our shared galactic history." "I apologize, Professor," Keith said, feeling his face grow hot. "I meant no disrespect." "Perhaps," the professor said, his voice taking on a clinical tone, "this is an educational opportunity. Human Northfield, would you care to explain to the class why your species might joke about consuming lethal toxins?" Keith wanted to sink through the floor. It's not specific to poisonous plants. Humans sometimes use humor to diffuse fear or anxiety. It's a psychological coping mechanism. Glorn, a Morbulan student whose translucent body pulsed with bioluminescent light, made a bubbling sound that the universal translator rendered as fascinating. Humans intentionally reference dangerous scenarios as entertainment. Not exactly, Keith tried to explain. It's more about, I understand now, interrupted Zix, another Vitrurian. It is like when our younglings play touch the electric fence to establish dominance hierarchies. No, that's not. Can humans actually neutralize toxins with these dressings? Asked a Proximan student, whose name Keith couldn't remember. No, salad dressing is just for flavor, Keith explained, feeling increasingly frustrated. It was just a joke because these plants resemble earth vegetables. Professor Zelnak raised all four hands for silence. This discussion, while anthropologically interesting, diverts us from our lesson. However, Human Northfield has inadvertently highlighted an important point. Many deadly toxins in our galaxy evolved specifically to mimic edible substances. The professor activated a holographic display showing various plant specimens rotating in the air. This brings us to today's practical exercise. You will each be assigned a poisonous plant to analyze. Your task is to identify its toxic compounds and theorize potential neutralizing agents. As the professor assigned plants to each student, Keith's communicator vibrated with a private message from Trix. I still do not understand your joke, but I have studied Earth cuisine. I have salad dressing in my quarters if you truly require it. Keith smiled slightly. Maybe he wasn't as isolated as he thought. When class ended, Keith gathered his materials, still embarrassed by the attention his failed joke had attracted. As he was about to leave, Professor Zelnak called him over. Human Northfield, a moment of your time, please. Keith approached the professor's desk nervously. Yes, Professor. Your humor, while inappropriate for the classroom setting, raises an interesting point about cross-species education, Zelnak said, his third eye focused intently on Keith. Many human exchange students struggle with the seriousness of xenobotanical studies. I understand the seriousness, Keith assured him. I shouldn't have made the joke. On the contrary, Zelnak replied, surprising Keith. Your species' ability to find humor in dangerous situations is a trait worth studying. Perhaps it contributes to humanity's rapid adaptation to interstellar travel. Before Keith could respond, the professor continued. I am assigning you a special research project. You will examine the cultural and psychological reasons behind human consumption habits, particularly regarding potentially toxic substances. You mean like how humans eat spicy food even though it causes pain? Keith asked. Precisely. Or how your species consumes fermented beverages that temporarily impair cognitive function. Or how some earth plants like cassava require special preparation to remove cyanide compounds before consumption. Keith nodded, intrigued despite himself. That actually sounds interesting. You will present your findings to the class next week, Zelnak said. I believe this will be educational for everyone, yourself included. As Keith left the laboratory, he found Trix waiting in the corridor. I still have questions about human humor, she said, falling into step beside him. And I was serious about the salad dressing. It is a vinaigrette from earth plants grown in hydroponics section 7. Keith smiled. Thanks, but I was just making a bad joke. Although I am hungry, want to grab lunch at the commissary. Yes, though I must warn you that today they are serving Jovian slug stew. It is considered a delicacy, Keith grimaced. Maybe I'll stick with the synthesized protein bars. A wise choice, Trix agreed. Though I find it amusing that, after joking about eating deadly toxins, you are afraid of perfectly safe slug stew. See, now you're getting human humor, Keith said with a laugh. As they walked toward the commissary, Keith's communicator chimed with an urgent message. It was from the Academy's administrative office. Alert! Unidentified botanical specimen detected in commissary food supply. All students report to medical for screening. Keith and Trix exchanged worried glances. Do you think this is related to our class? Keith asked. It seems too coincidental, Trix replied, her scales shifting to an anxious yellow. We should go to medical immediately. When they arrived at the medical bay, it was already crowded with students and faculty. Dr. Pora, the head physician, was directing people into screening lanes. What's happening? Keith asked a Prussian medical technician who was scanning students with a handheld device. An unidentified plant material was discovered in the food preparation area, the technician explained. It bears similarities to Veridian Vex. Keith felt his stomach drop. But that's incredibly toxic. How did it get into the food supply? We're investigating, the technician said tersely. Please proceed to lane 3 for scanning. Keith joined the line, watching as students ahead of him were scanned and either cleared or directed to isolation pods for further testing. When his turn came, the scanner beeped alarmingly. Human Northfield, the technician said, looking at his readings. You have trace amounts of an unknown substance in your system. Please follow Nurse Glix to isolation pod 7. But I haven't eaten anything today, Keith protested as a 6-limbed nurse approached. Nevertheless, the scanner detected something, the technician insisted. It could be a false positive due to your human physiology, but we must be certain. As Keith was led to an isolation pod, a transparent chamber designed to contain potentially contagious patients, he saw Professor Zelnak enter the medical bay, looking grave. Professor, Keith called out. What's going on? Zelnak approached, keeping a safe distance from the isolation pod. It appears that someone has removed a specimen from the xenobotany lab, specifically a cutting from the Veridian Vex. But who would do that? Keith asked, feeling increasingly anxious in the confined space of the pod. That is what security is attempting to determine, the professor replied. The timing, immediately after our class on toxic plants, suggests it may have been a student. Keith's mind raced. Is anyone showing symptoms? Not yet, which is fortunate. Veridian Vex toxin acts quickly. If anyone had consumed a significant amount, we would already be seeing casualties. A medical scanner descended from the ceiling of Keith's pod and began analyzing his vital signs. Dr. Pora approached, looking at the readings. Human Northfield, your scans show trace amounts of a compound similar to Veridian Vex, but it's not an exact match, the doctor said. Have you handled any plant specimens today? Only in class, and I wore protective gloves, Keith replied. And like I said, I haven't eaten anything today. Dr. Pora looked puzzled. The compound appears to be in your digestive tract, yet you claim not to have eaten. Curious. Wait, Keith said, suddenly remembering. I took a nutrient supplement this morning. Could that be it? Possible. Where is this supplement now? In my quarters, in the bathroom cabinet. Dr. Pora tapped something into a datapad. I'm sending security to retrieve it. In the meantime, you'll remain in isolation as a precaution. Hours passed as Keith waited anxiously in the isolation pod. Medical staff occasionally checked his vital signs, but otherwise, he was left alone with his thoughts. Had someone deliberately planted toxic material in the academy? Was it related to his ill-timed joke in class? Finally, Professor Zelnak returned, accompanied by Dr. Pora and 2 security officers. We have identified the source of the contamination, Zelnak announced. and it appears you are inadvertently connected to it, human Northfield. Keith felt a chill run down his spine. What do you mean? Your nutrient supplement, Dr. Pora explained, contains an earth plant extract called milk thistle. It bears molecular similarities to Veridian Vex, enough to trigger our scanners but is harmless to humans. So I'm not poisoned? Keith asked, relief washing over him. No, but your supplement caused our detection systems to identify a false positive, which triggered the alert, the doctor said. However, during our investigation, we discovered that someone did attempt to introduce a toxic substance into the food supply. Who? Keith asked. One of the security officers stepped forward. A maintenance worker, a Denebian named Kraz. He was attempting to extract certain compounds from the plants for illegal substance production. He never intended to poison anyone. He was stealing the plants for their psychoactive properties when processed correctly. Keith slumped back in the isolation pod. So my stupid joke about salad dressing had nothing to do with this. On the contrary, Professor Zelnak said, his third eye blinking rapidly. Your comment caused several students to discuss Earth foods in the presence of Kraz, who was servicing the laboratory ventilation system during class. This led him to believe the plants might have culinary applications, which accelerated his plan to steal specimens. So it is my fault, Keith groaned. Not entirely, the professor said. Kraz has confessed that he had been planning the theft for weeks. Your comment merely influenced his timing. Dr. Pora pressed a button and the isolation pod opened. You're free to go, human Northfield. Your supplement has been cleared for continued use, though we've updated our scanners to recognize it. As Keith stepped out of the pod, feeling both relieved and embarrassed, Trix approached. I brought you food, she said, holding out a container. Since you missed lunch during this ordeal, Keith opened the container to find what looked like a salad made from synthesized vegetables. Thanks, Trix. She held out a small packet, and salad dressing as promised. Despite everything, Keith laughed. You know, I think I've lost my appetite for salad today. Understandable, Trix said, her scales shifting to a pleased pink. Perhaps tomorrow you will appreciate it more. The following day, Keith's xenobotany class was buzzing with excitement over the previous day's events. As students took their seats, many glanced at Keith with new interest. Professor Zelnak entered the lab and immediately addressed the situation. Before we continue with our studies, I want to clarify yesterday's incident. The attempted theft of laboratory specimens highlights the importance of security protocols and the real-world applications of what we study here. The professor's third eye fixed on Keith. It also demonstrates how cultural misunderstandings can have unexpected consequences. Human Northfield's joke, while inappropriate for the classroom, inadvertently helped security identify a potential threat. Keith shifted uncomfortably as all eyes turned to him. Which brings me to today's lesson, Zelnak continued. We will be studying cultural variations in toxin perception across species. What one species considers poisonous, another may consider medicinal or even delicious. The professor activated the holographic display, showing a familiar earth plant. For instance, capsaicin, a compound found in earth peppers, causes pain sensations in humans, yet they voluntarily consume it for pleasure. Like how Vetrurians consume small amounts of selenium for its mood-enhancing effects, Trix added, though large doses would be fatal. Precisely, Zelnak agreed. Throughout the galaxy, species have developed complex relationships with toxic substances. Understanding these relationships is crucial for xenobiologists. As the class proceeded, Keith found himself increasingly engaged. The professor had turned his embarrassing moment into a valuable learning opportunity, and for the first time, other students were asking him questions about human dietary habits. After class, Professor Zelnak asked Keith to stay behind again. "Human Northfield, I've been considering your special research project," the professor said. "I'd like to expand it into a collaborative study. Several students have expressed interest in working with you to explore cross-species consumption habits." "Really?" Keith asked, surprised. "Even after my joke nearly caused a security incident." "The incident was not your fault," Zelnak assured him, "and your unique human perspective could provide valuable insights." "Your joke, while ill-timed, demonstrated the human tendency to use humor to process potentially dangerous situations, a trait that might have evolutionary advantages." Keith considered this. "I guess it is interesting how different species approach danger differently. Humans joke about it, Vitrurians change color, Morbulans vibrate at different frequencies." "Exactly," the professor said, his scales brightening with enthusiasm. "I believe this could be the foundation for an important research paper, perhaps even publication in the Galactic Xenobiology Journal." For the first time since arriving at the academy, Keith felt like he might actually belong. "I'd like that, Professor." Over the next few weeks, Keith worked with a diverse team of alien students on their research project. They studied how different species processed and responded to potentially toxic substances, from Earth's caffeine to Proxima Centauri's bioluminescent fungi. Trix became Keith's closest collaborator, fascinated by human dietary practices. "I cannot comprehend why humans would deliberately consume spicy food that causes pain," she said one evening as they worked in the research lab. "It's hard to explain," Keith admitted. "The pain from spicy food triggers endorphins, pleasure chemicals in our brains. It's like a controlled danger that makes us feel alive. Similar to how my species enjoys brief electrical stimulation during celebration rituals," Trix mused. "The mild pain creates group bonding." Their research led to surprising discoveries about evolutionary parallels across planets. Species from worlds with similar environmental pressures often developed comparable relationships with toxic substances, despite having completely different biochemistry. As the presentation day approached, Keith found himself actually looking forward to sharing their findings. The team had prepared extensive data visualizations showing how different species process toxins, along with cultural analysis of why certain dangerous substances were consumed anyway. On the day of the presentation, the xenobotany laboratory was filled beyond capacity. Not only was their class present, but faculty from other departments and even some visiting researchers had come to hear their findings. Keith began the presentation. "What started as a poorly timed joke about salad dressing has led us to explore a fascinating aspect of sentient life throughout the galaxy. Our complicated relationship with things that can kill us." The audience laughed, a mix of human chuckles, Vitrurian scale flashing, Morbulan bubbling, and various other species-specific expressions of amusement. "Every intelligent species we studied has independently developed cultural practices around consuming substances that are, in some way, dangerous," Keith continued. "From human alcohol to Proximan glow fungus to Vitrurian selenium crystals." Trix took over, displaying a chart showing biochemical similarities between toxins consumed across 27 different worlds. "We discovered that despite different evolutionary paths, many species have developed neural reward systems that activate when consuming certain toxins in controlled amounts." The presentation continued, with each team member sharing different aspects of their research. When they finished, the audience erupted in a cacophony of approval applause, color-changing, vibrations, and scent releases that made the room's air filtration system work overtime. Professor Zelnak approached the team as the audience dispersed. Exceptional work. You've taken what could have been a simple joke and transformed it into a genuine contribution to xenobiological understanding. Thank you, Professor, Keith said, feeling a sense of pride he hadn't experienced since coming to the Academy. The Galactic Xenobiology Journal has already expressed interest in publishing your findings, Zelnak continued, and the Academy Board has approved funding for you to continue this research. Keith looked at his teammates in amazement. What had started as an embarrassing moment had transformed into something meaningful, a bridge between species, a way of understanding each other through their shared relationship with danger. As they left the laboratory, Trix handed Keith a small container. "To celebrate our success," she said. Keith opened it to find a salad made from safe, synthesized earth vegetables, along with a small packet of dressing. "I thought it was an appropriate way to commemorate how this all began," she explained, her scales turning a warm, friendly orange. Keith laughed and opened the dressing packet. "You know what? I think I've earned this salad." As he ate, surrounded by his alien research partners, Keith reflected on how a single misplaced joke had ultimately helped him find his place in the vastness of interstellar academia. Sometimes the most poisonous-seeming situations could, with the right approach, become the most nourishing. In the months that followed, Keith and his team's research expanded to include field studies on various planets. They discovered that the phenomenon they had identified, sentient species deliberately consuming controlled amounts of toxic substances, was nearly universal across the galaxy. Their paper, titled Adaptive Toxin Consumption, a cross-species analysis of deliberate exposure to harmful substances, became required reading at xenobiology academies throughout the Galactic Alliance. Keith found himself giving lectures on Earth and other worlds, explaining the human perspective on everything from spicy food to caffeine addiction. During one such lecture on Proxima Centauri b, Keith brought the audience to laughter with the story of his salad dressing joke. What had once been an embarrassing mistake had become the foundation of his academic career. After the lecture, as Keith was preparing to return to Vecheria Station, he received an urgent message from Professor Zelnak. "Return immediately. Discovery with Veridian Vex requires your expertise." When Keith arrived back at the Academy 2 days later, he found the xenobotany laboratory under quarantine protocols. Professor Zelnak met him outside, all three eyes blinking with excitement. "Human Northfield, Keith, we've made a breakthrough," the professor said. "Your team's research led us to reconsider the Veridian Vex. We discovered that in minute doses properly processed, it has remarkable medical properties." "Medical properties?" Keith asked, surprised. "But it's one of the deadliest plants in the galaxy." "As you humans say, the dose makes the poison," Zelnak replied. "In nanogram quantities, compounds from the Vex can stimulate neural regeneration in damaged tissue. It could revolutionize treatment for certain injuries." Keith shook his head in amazement. "So even the deadliest plant in the galaxy has beneficial uses when approached correctly." "Precisely," Zelnak said. "And it was your human perspective, your willingness to joke about danger, that helped us look at these toxic plants differently." As they entered the laboratory's observation room, Keith saw the research team carefully extracting minute samples from the Veridian Vex. Among them was Trix, who waved one of her 4 arms in greeting. "I never thought my worst classroom moment would lead to this," Keith said. "That is the beauty of science," Zelnak replied. "Even our mistakes can lead to discovery if we are open to learning from them." Later, as Keith helped analyze the extracted compounds, Trix approached with a container. "Sustenance," she said. "You humans need to eat frequently." Keith opened it to find another salad. "Let me guess, with dressing?" "Of course," Trix replied, her scales turning the bright pink that Keith now recognized as her version of a smile. "It has become our research team's tradition." As Keith ate his salad, surrounded by alien colleagues who had become friends, he realized that his journey had come full circle. What had begun with a misplaced joke about poisonous plants and salad dressing had evolved into groundbreaking research that could help countless beings across the galaxy. Sometimes, Keith thought, the most poisonous-seeming situations contained unexpected nourishment. You just needed the right dressing to make them palatable. And as the team continued their work, extracting healing from toxins and understanding from difference, Keith knew that he had found not just his place in the vast expanse of the universe, but also a new way of looking at danger and opportunity, a perspective that crossed the boundaries between worlds and species, connecting them all in their shared journey of discovery. In the end, it wasn't about avoiding toxins or fearing the unknown. It was about understanding them, respecting their power, and finding the hidden benefits that might, with the right approach, transform danger into healing.